A lot of reiterating NATO's support for Ukraine and not mincing words, Doug, when it comes to Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and I just want to pick up, though, on what you just said. This has been a tactic of Russia all along, of basically accusing the other side of doing what you may be planning on doing yourself, you being the Russian forces in this case. And there have been in recent days Russian accusations against the West, the U.S., of helping Ukraine to develop chemical, biological weapons on, Ukrainian territory with the intent, presumably, of using them at some point. And this is exactly when Stoltenberg talks about that, he sees this as part of a pattern that, in other words, they are trying to preempt anyone accusing them of using chemical weapons when that could be in their battle plan by trying to preemptively accuse others. A charge that was brought up at the UN Security Council by Russia, which has been dismissed as absolutely ludicrous and absurd, absolutely no evidence. But that's a type of thing which could set the stage for that exact false flag operation. And Jens Stoltenberg himself in recent days has expressed his fears, his concerns that exactly this type of attack could be in the offing by Russia, and that they are trying to turn the tables, accuse the West of doing what Russia itself has the intention of doing, sort of covering their own tracks. My big takeaways here is, when Jens Stoltenberg speaks, his hands are often sort of tied behind his back rhetorically, right? Because he's the Secretary-General of NATO. It's a defensive alliance. That's how it's defined. And he himself, he has been very clear. We can support Ukraine. NATO, that is, the 30 NATO members, support, but they can't go onto the ground and defend Ukraine. And the reason they can't do it goes back to because it's a defensive alliance. They cannot do anything that is or even can be seen by Russia as being provocative and can draw NATO and the West and the U.S. into a full-fledged all-out war. He's constantly fighting in all of these press conferences and his interviews. We interviewed him recently here on the set against what's called a sort of a do more bias. Whenever you have a war situation, especially in this war since February 24th, you have a chorus of voices, and it's found rare bipartisan consent in the U.S. between Democrats and Republicans, a chorus of voices calling on you, urging NATO, do more. Why aren't you there? Why aren't you having a no-fly zone? Why don't you have boots on the ground? How do you fight back against that do more bias? And this is what he's constantly finding himself doing. He said we can be more ready. We can have, higher readiness. We could have more reinforcement of our troops on NATO territory. We can't go beyond that. And that's what he reiterated today. But he did say very specifically, and this is where he didn't mince words, Charles, you're right. He said Putin is responsible for this war. This war could end very quickly if Vladimir Putin were to cease the fire of his guns and his troops and withdraw his forces. Yes, wars are infinitely easier to start than end, the adage goes. That's true. Harder to end wars than to begin them. But in this case, he basically telegraphed his belief that if there is an end to this war, Russia could end it relatively quickly if it had the will to do so.
Doug Herbert with that analysis of Jens Stoltenberg's statements.